Moonlight revealed wolf marks on the Omega's face, and the Alpha King dropped the blade. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. In the heart of the moonlit night, as the silvery light bathed the land, Emily Dawson stood by the window, her pale face illuminated by the soft glow. Her heart pounded, and her breath caught in her chest as she traced the strange, wolf-like marks that had suddenly appeared on her skin. They weren't there before. The marks, glowing faintly under the moonlight, felt like a part of her she didn't recognize, a part that scared her and intrigued her all at once. Emily wasn't just an Omega. She was something more. But what? The questions swirled in her mind, consuming her every thought. What did these marks mean? Why had they appeared now? She had always known she was different. But this was something else. As the wind howled outside, she turned from the window, her pale blonde hair cascading down her back, her blue eyes searching the room for answers she knew she wouldn't find here. The Alpha King, Alexander Hawk, had always been a figure of fear and power. His name alone was enough to make even the bravest shudder. He ruled with an iron fist, cold and unyielding, and no one dared question his authority. Yet, here she was, Emily Dawson, an Omega, caught in the web of secrets and power she didn't fully understand. The door creaked open behind her, and she stiffened. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and imposing, bathed in the shadows. It was Alexander, the Alpha King. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "What are you hiding, Emily?" His voice was low, carrying an authority that made her heart skip a beat. The tension in the air was thick, and she could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her. She swallowed hard, gathering the courage to speak, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm not hiding anything, Your Majesty," she replied, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. The truth was, she didn't understand what was happening to her either. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. He studied her with a penetrating intensity, as though trying to peel away the layers of secrets she'd built around herself. "The marks on your face. They weren't there before," he said, his tone more a statement than a question. Emily couldn't bring herself to respond immediately. What could she say? How could she explain something she didn't fully understand? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know what they mean, Alexander. I swear." Alexander's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Emily to catch the glimpse of something. Was it curiosity? Or concern? Before she could analyze it further, his gaze hardened again, and the cold authority returned. "This is not something you can hide, Emily. You are marked, and that changes everything. I will find out what these marks mean, and when I do, it will change both of our fates." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the room, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts, her heart still racing. She pressed her hand to the window, staring out into the vast night, the moonlight now casting an eerie glow over her features. What had just happened? What was the Alpha King planning? Emily didn't know, but she had a sinking feeling that the answers she sought were far more dangerous than she could imagine. The sound of the door closing behind Alexander echoed in Emily's ears as she stood motionless, her body still pressed against the window. The moonlight, now a constant companion, seemed to intensify, casting long shadows across the room. Yet Emily felt more lost than ever before. The Alpha King's words lingered in her mind, his presence pressing against her thoughts like an unseen weight. "You are marked, and that changes everything." The words played over and over, each repetition more unsettling than the last. She pressed her fingers to her temple, trying to block out the nagging doubt. She was marked? Yes, but why? What did it mean? Emily had always known she was different. As an Omega, she was born into a world of limitations, her life, confined by rules and expectations that dictated her every move. She had never questioned her place, never thought to challenge the order of things. But now, with the strange wolf marks on her face, everything had changed. Emily took a step back from the window, her heart racing in her chest. What if Alexander was right? What if these marks were a sign of something far more dangerous than she had ever realized? She turned to the small mirror hanging on the wall, her reflection staring back at her. The marks were faint, but they glowed softly in the dim light. They were jagged, like scratches or scars, but they felt alive, almost as if they were part of her, not just on her. Emily reached up tentatively, her fingers brushing against the markings. The sensation was strange, almost electric, as if the marks were responding to her touch. She quickly pulled her hand away, her breath shallow. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if they had a mind of their own. There was a knock at the door, pulling her from her thoughts. Emily jumped, startled. "Come in," she called, her voice barely a whisper. The door creaked open slowly, and in stepped a familiar figure, Cassidy, her closest friend. Cassidy was one of the few people who didn't treat Emily like she was less than human, a mere omega to be ignored or belittled. She was kind, supportive, and always seemed to know when something was wrong. "Hey, are you okay?" Cassidy asked, her eyes searching Emily's face for signs of distress. Emily turned toward her friend, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Cassidy raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "About what?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how much she should reveal. The marks on her face felt like a secret, something she wasn't sure she was ready to share with anyone. But Cassidy was her friend, and she trusted her more than anyone else. "It's these marks," Emily finally said, her voice low. "I don't understand them. They just appeared." Cassidy's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. "I can't say I understand what's happening, but you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Emily gave her friend a grateful look, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening to her was far beyond what Cassidy could help with. The door to the room opened again, and this time, it wasn't Cassidy who entered. The Alpha King himself, Alexander Hawk, stood in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the light. His gaze immediately locked onto Emily, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't say a word at first, simply observing her, his gaze moving over the marks on her face. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to look away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. Alexander didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space, commanding attention without even trying. "I've come to see if the marks are real," he said quietly, his voice carrying an underlying authority that made Emily's heart race. She swallowed hard, but stood her ground. "They're real," she replied, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. Alexander's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, and then he nodded, as if satisfied. "We'll need to find out what this means. You're not safe until we do." Emily couldn't tell if he was being protective or simply asserting his dominance, but either way, the tension in the air was thick, and she couldn't help but feel that her life was about to change forever. Emily's heart raced as Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "You're not safe until we find out what this means." The weight of his gaze, the coldness in his eyes, sent a chill down her spine. It was as though the very air around them had thickened, the tension palpable. She had never imagined that something as simple as a mark on her face could change everything. But standing before the Alpha King now, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. "What do you expect me to do?" Emily asked, trying to steady her voice. She wasn't sure what she was asking, whether it was about the marks, her safety, or Alexander's intentions. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I expect you to come with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily hesitated, her mind spinning. The last thing she wanted to do was follow him anywhere, especially after the strange encounter in her room. Yet, there was no escaping the reality of her situation. She had been marked, and now she was tangled in something far beyond her understanding. "Come with you where?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "To the council," he replied. "They will help us understand the significance of these marks. You need to be prepared, Emily. This isn't just about you. It's about everything. Our world, our future." Emily felt a flutter of panic in her chest. The council was a place where only the most powerful, the most influential figures gathered. It was a place of secrets, of hidden knowledge, and of decisions that shaped the course of the entire kingdom. "I'm not ready for this," she whispered, almost to herself. Alexander's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You don't have a choice." You never did. He turned and began walking toward the door, his steps sure and steady. Emily stood frozen for a moment longer, the weight of his words sinking in. She could feel her pulse racing, a mixture of fear and curiosity bubbling up inside her. She didn't know what awaited her in the council, but she knew one thing: there was no turning back. She gathered her breath, steeled herself, and followed him out of the room. As they walked through the corridors of the palace, Emily's mind raced. The castle was eerily silent, the grand halls devoid of the usual bustle. The walls, adorned with tapestries and ancient relics, seemed to close in on her as she followed Alexander. His pace was unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world, while Emily could feel every second ticking away, the pressure building. They finally reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway. Alexander paused in front of it, turning to look at her. Once we enter, you must remain calm. The council does not tolerate weakness, he warned, his tone serious. Emily nodded, though her nerves were getting the better of her. She wasn't sure if it was the idea of facing the council, or the thought of what they might learn about the marks, but she couldn't help the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Alexander pushed open the door, revealing a room filled with figures cloaked in shadow. The council was already assembled, their faces hidden in the dim light. Emily couldn't make out any details of their features, but she could feel their presence, their power. It was overwhelming. As they entered, the members of the council shifted slightly, their attention now on her. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, and Emily felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. She had imagined the council to be a distant, faceless entity, but now that she was standing in the room with them, the weight of their gaze was almost too much to bear. Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding. "This is Emily Dawson," he announced, his voice strong and clear. "She has been marked, and we need answers." The council's eyes locked onto Emily, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. She was being judged, scrutinized, and she had no idea what would happen next. The council chamber was filled with an eerie stillness, the only sound being the subtle rustling of robes and the faint echo of their footsteps on the cold stone floor. Emily stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest, as the eyes of the council members bore down on her. Their presence was like an invisible weight, pressing against her with every passing second. The air seemed thick with power, and for a moment, Emily wondered if she was going to suffocate under it. Alexander stood beside her, unwavering, his expression unreadable. His hand was placed lightly on her back, a gesture that could have been seen as comforting, but to Emily, it only added to the pressure. She couldn't speak. Words felt too fragile, too insignificant in a room where every gaze felt like a judgment. "Emily Dawson," a voice from the shadows spoke, its tone calm but filled with authority. Emily turned toward the sound, her eyes searching the darkness. She could barely make out the figure, their features hidden by the dim light, but their voice was unmistakable, an elder, one of the highest-ranking members of the council. "You have come to us under strange circumstances," the elder continued, their voice echoing in the large room. "Marked by the wolf. And yet, you are but an omega. This is a matter of great concern." Emily swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't know why this is happening," she replied, her voice small but clear. "The marks, they just appeared. I don't understand them." The council members exchanged silent glances, their expressions unreadable. Emily could feel their curiosity, their judgment, as they weighed her words. "These marks are not ordinary," the elders said, stepping forward, their voice now laced with an intensity that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "They are a symbol of something much greater, something that should not be borne by an omega, something that could change the very balance of power in our world." Emily's mind reeled. What could they mean? How was it possible? The marks, she had always assumed, were a curse, a sign of her insignificance. But now, hearing the elder's words, she realized that maybe she was wrong. "We will need to investigate further," the elder said. "This is not something that can be ignored. The markings you bear are connected to the ancient bloodlines, to the very foundation of our kind. They cannot be dismissed." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Ancient bloodlines. She had never heard of such a thing. "But what does this have to do with me?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. I'm just an Omega. I don't know anything about ancient bloodlines or power. The elder's gaze softened, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of something like understanding. Perhaps, the elder said, but you are not just any Omega, Emily. These marks were not placed upon you by accident. There is a reason they have appeared now, and you must find that reason before it is too late. Alexander stepped forward, his posture commanding. What do you suggest? He asked, his voice calm but firm. What do we do now? The elder turned their attention to Alexander, their eyes narrowing slightly. There are rituals, the elder said, their voice quiet but filled with the weight of centuries. Rituals that can unlock the full potential of these marks. Rituals that could give you, Emily, a power you never dreamed possible. But be warned, such power comes with great risk. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Power? She had never desired power, never craved it. But now, the possibility of something greater, something beyond her wildest imaginings, hung in the air like a tantalizing promise. But the risk? What was the cost? What kind of risk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The elder's eyes seemed to pierce through her, as if they could see right into her soul. The risk of losing yourself, they said softly. The risk of becoming something you are not. Emily felt the weight of those words settle over her. Could she bear it? Could she embrace whatever this was? The marks, the power, the unknown? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The silence in the council chamber was heavy, and Emily felt every second stretch longer than the last. The weight of the elder's words hung in the air, a palpable tension. The possibility of power, of transformation, was tantalizing, yet the risk was equally overwhelming. The elder's cryptic warning echoed in her mind. The risk of losing yourself. What did that truly mean? Could she handle whatever this power might bring, or would it consume her in ways she couldn't even imagine? The council members remained still, their eyes locked on her, observing every flicker of emotion on her face. She could almost feel them measuring her, waiting for her to make a decision, to show them who she truly was. Alexander stood beside her, his presence a quiet but unyielding force. She could feel the calm energy emanating from him, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. She stole a glance at him, his face a mask of focus. Emily, he said softly, his voice cutting through the stillness. You do not have to decide now. We will support you through this, whatever path you choose. His words were meant to reassure her, but Emily's mind was still racing. She couldn't understand why she had been marked, why these ancient symbols had appeared on her skin. And more importantly, what was the cost of unlocking the power they promised? The elder's voice broke through her thoughts again, steady and unyielding. The ritual is not something to be taken lightly, they said. Once you begin, there is no turning back. The markings will guide you, but they will also test you. They will push you to your limits and beyond. Emily's heart beat faster. Her mind was a whirlwind, torn between the allure of power and the fear of the unknown. She had always been the weak one, the one who had to hide, who had to stay in the shadows. But what if these marks were a way out? What if they could change everything for her future? What do you need from me? She asked her, voice quieter than before. The elder's gaze softened slightly, as though recognizing the internal battle within her. We need you to trust in the process, they replied. Only through the ritual can we determine the full extent of your power. It is a chance for you to embrace what has been awakened within you. Emily hesitated. The words sounded almost too simple, too easy. Trust the process. But trust was something she had never given lightly. She had learned early on to rely on herself, to keep her distance from the powers that ruled her world. And yet, now, she found herself standing on the precipice of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Alexander stepped closer to her, his presence solid and grounding. Emily, he said, his voice soft but insistent. This is not just about you. This affects all of us. Your fate, our fate, is intertwined with the outcome of this. If you are ready, then we will move forward together. But if you are not, we will find another way. His words were a reminder of the weight of the situation. Emily knew that whatever she decided would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone around her. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She could feel the marks on her face, their presence more intense now, as if they were calling to her, urging her to act. Slowly, She nodded. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. The elder nodded in approval. Very well. We begin tomorrow at dawn. Prepare yourself, Emily Dawson. The path you have chosen is not an easy one, but it is the only one that can unlock the truth. As the elder's words settled in the room, Emily felt a strange sense of resolve forming within her. She wasn't sure what the ritual would bring, but she knew one thing. It was her only chance to find out what these marks meant and to understand her place in this world. With Alexander by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope, even in the face of the uncertainty ahead. The council began to disperse, the tension slowly lifting, but Emily's thoughts remained focused on the journey that awaited her. Tomorrow, everything would change. The sun had barely risen when Emily stood at the edge of the ancient stone circle, the cool morning air biting at her skin. The council had arranged everything, the ritual, the place, the time, and now, she stood on the precipice of something she could barely comprehend. The marks on her face, now more pronounced in the light of day, felt almost alive, their power pulsing just beneath the surface of her skin. She could feel the weight of them, as though they were calling to her, urging her to step forward into the unknown. Alexander stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, yet Emily could sense the underlying tension in his stance. He was here for her, but she also knew that the success of this ritual was not just for her alone, it was for everyone. The fate of their world rested in her hands. Are you ready? Alexander asked, his voice low and steady. Emily turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. She nodded slowly, though she wasn't sure if she was ready. How could anyone be ready for something like this? But there was no turning back now. The decision had already been made. I'm ready, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Let's do this. Alexander gave her a brief, encouraging smile before stepping forward, guiding her toward the center of the circle. The council members were already gathered, standing in a semicircle around the sacred site, their faces solemn and expectant. The air was thick with anticipation. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching her, waiting for her to fail or to succeed. Either way, her actions today would change everything. As they reached the center, the elder from the council stepped forward, his robes flowing behind him like a shadow. He was the one who would oversee the ritual. His eyes, though filled with wisdom, were hard to read, and Emily couldn't quite tell whether he believed she was truly ready for this. Emily Dawson, the elder said, his voice carrying through the still morning air. You have come to us marked by the wolf. You stand on the threshold of great power, but also great risk. Only you can decide if you are willing to embrace what lies ahead. The elder's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. I am ready, she repeated, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The elder nodded, and with a swift motion, he raised his arms to the sky, calling upon the ancient powers that had long been dormant in the land. The ground beneath them seemed to hum with energy, the air charged with an electric current. Emily felt it, felt the power building around her, as though the very earth was reacting to her presence. She could see the faint outlines of the wolf's markings on her skin begin to glow softly, the lines shifting and twisting as though they were alive. The elder spoke in a language Emily didn't understand, his words ancient and foreign. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy flowing through her, feeling it deep within her chest. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The world around her seemed to blur, and for a brief moment, Emily felt as though she was floating above it all, disconnected from her body. The wolf's markings on her face burned with an intensity that made her gasp, the power coursing through her veins like fire. She could feel something awakening inside of her, something primal and ancient. She could feel the wolf, the creature whose mark she bore, stirring within her. It was a wild, untamed force, one that wanted to break free. Emily opened her eyes, her breath quick and shallow. The world around her was no longer the same. The air was thick with magic, and she could see the faint glow of the markings on her skin reflected in the eyes of the council members. The elder lowered his arms, and the energy in the air seemed to settle. The ritual is complete, he said quietly. You have unlocked the first step of your power. Emily's body trembled, the energy still coursing through her like a storm. She looked at Alexander, her gaze wild and searching. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander stepped forward, his expression unreadable but softening slightly as he reached out to steady her. "Now we wait," he said. "Now, we learn what this power means and how it will shape the future." Emily nodded, though a part of her wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The ritual had opened something within her, but she didn't yet know what that meant for her, for Alexander, or for their world. What had she unlocked, and what would it cost her to control it? She didn't know, but the journey had only just begun. The days following the ritual were a blur for Emily. The overwhelming energy from the ceremony still hummed through her, an ever-present undercurrent that refused to fade. She could feel the power within her, its presence both comforting and unnerving. It was as though she had become a vessel for something ancient, something wild, that had been waiting to awaken. The wolf's mark on her face had not faded. In fact, it had only grown more pronounced, the lines shifting with an intensity that was almost alive. Emily would catch glimpses of herself in reflective surfaces, startled by the deep glow of the markings, the way they pulsed with energy. They had become a part of her, inseparable from who she was now. Alexander had kept close by, as he had promised. He watched over her, offering his support, but there was a quiet distance in his gaze, an uncertainty she hadn't seen before. Emily knew the power she had unlocked was more than he had expected. It wasn't just about the marks. It was about the very essence of what she was becoming. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked one evening, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Emily turned to face him, her eyes weary but resolute. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel different. It's like something is stirring inside me, something I can't control." She didn't know how to explain the sensation. The hunger she felt when she let her mind wander, the overwhelming pull of the wolf that seemed to call her, urging her to embrace it. Alexander's brow furrowed with concern. "It's the power. The ritual has awakened something deep within you. But you must learn to control it, Emily. If you don't, it will control you." Emily clenched her fists at her sides, the words echoing in her mind. The idea of losing control terrified her. She didn't want to become a danger to herself or anyone else. "How do I control it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander paused, his gaze searching her face, as if trying to find the answer in her eyes. "I don't know yet," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of truth. "But we will find out. Together." Over the next few days, Emily's training began. Alexander guided her through the basics, teaching her how to focus her mind, how to push the power back when it threatened to consume her. It wasn't easy. Every time she let go, even for a moment, she could feel the wolf clawing at the edges of her consciousness, desperate to break free. But with Alexander's steady presence, she found moments of calm. They practiced in the palace gardens, the serenity of the space offering a stark contrast to the chaos she felt within. She learned to breathe through the sensation, to center herself when the pull of the wolf became too strong. But it wasn't just about controlling the power. Emily had to learn who she was now, what these marks meant, what she had become. Was she still the same person, the same Omega who had lived her life in fear and restraint? Or was she someone new, someone capable of more than she had ever imagined? The questions weighed heavily on her, and she often found herself staring into the distant horizon, trying to find the answers within herself. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Emily collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily. Her body was drained, her mind a swirl of confusion and fear. Alexander sat beside her, his eyes soft with understanding. "You're doing well," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's not easy, but you are making progress." Emily let out a shaky breath, looking up at the sky. "I don't feel like I'm making any progress. I feel like I'm losing myself." Alexander's expression shifted, and for a moment, he seemed to hesitate before he spoke. "Emily, you are not losing yourself. You are finding who you truly are." She turned her head to look at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "And who is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, Emily saw something like hope in his eyes. "That is something only you can discover. But I will be here, every step of the way, helping you through it." Emily nodded, though the weight of her own uncertainty pressed heavily on her. She didn't know what the future held, or what she was becoming, but one thing was certain, she couldn't do this alone. And with Alexander by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could learn to embrace the power that had awakened inside her. The weeks passed in a blur, and Emily could feel herself changing in ways she didn't fully understand. The wolf inside her stirred constantly, pushing against the boundaries she tried to place around it. Every day, her control over the power grew stronger, but so did the intensity of the force within her. It was as though there was an endless well of energy waiting to be unleashed, and at times, Emily wondered how much longer she could contain it. Alexander remained by her side, always steady, always patient. His presence was a constant source of support, but she could see the worry in his eyes, the concern that she might not be able to master the power she had unlocked. "You're doing well," he told her one evening after another difficult training session. "But you're pushing yourself too hard. The power isn't something you can force. It has to come naturally." Emily took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She was exhausted, her muscles aching from the hours of practice. "I know," she said, her voice tight. "But it's so hard, Alexander. Every time I feel like I'm getting a grip on it, the power slips away, and the wolf, it's always there, in the back of my mind, clawing at me." Alexander placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his expression softening. "I know it's not easy, but this is part of the process. You're not just learning to control the power, you're learning who you are now. And that takes time." Emily nodded, but doubt still lingered in her heart. What if she couldn't control it? What if the power consumed her, as the elder had warned? It was a constant fear that gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the present. Over time, the nature of her training began to shift. Alexander had started to teach her how to use the power, how to channel it for specific purposes. It was different from what they had practiced before, where she had simply focused on keeping the wolf within her at bay. Now, she was learning to direct the energy, to use it to her advantage. One afternoon, in the quiet of the palace garden, Alexander stood before her, his posture firm and commanding. "Today, we're going to focus on the energy itself," he said. "I want you to try and move something. Anything. Use the power to push it, lift it, just control the energy, even for a moment." Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. She focused on the small stone at her feet, visualizing it lifting into the air. She could feel the energy building within her, the wolf stirring, pushing against her control. She squeezed her eyes shut and concentrated, her hands outstretched toward the stone. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, but nothing happened. Emily opened her eyes, frustration bubbling up inside her. "It's not working," she muttered. Alexander's voice was calm but firm. "It will take time, Emily. Don't rush it. Focus on the connection between you and the power. Feel it. Don't force it." Emily took another deep breath, closing her eyes once more. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind. She could feel the power deep within her, like a current running through her veins. Slowly, she began to direct it toward the stone. This time, there was a shift, a subtle movement, but it was enough. The stone wobbled, then lifted a fraction off the ground. Emily gasped, a rush of excitement flooding through her. "I did it," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Alexander smiled, his eyes glowing with pride. "You did. And now, you'll keep practicing. But remember, this is just the beginning." Emily stood in silence, her heart racing with exhilaration. For the first time, she felt like she was starting to understand the power inside her, not just how to control it, but how to be a part of it. She had always been an outsider, an omega, looking in from the edges of the world. But now, as the wolf stirred within her, she felt a new sense of belonging. She was part of something bigger, something ancient. And though she still had so much to learn, Emily felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. She wasn't just learning to control the power. She was learning who she could be with it. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a purpose, a future. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The power was hers to wield, and with it, she could shape the future on her own terms. Days passed in a blur of practice, exhaustion, and small triumphs. Emily felt herself changing with every passing moment, the power within her growing more familiar, yet still unpredictable. The wolf that had once been an unknown presence within her was now a constant companion, stirring restlessly in the back of her mind, waiting for her to embrace it fully. She had come a long way since the ritual, but there were still moments when she wasn't sure she could control it. The energy that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever known, a force that could be as gentle as a whisper or as fierce as a storm. One evening, after a particularly difficult training session, Emily found herself sitting alone in the palace garden, her body exhausted but her mind still racing. She stared up at the stars, the cool night air brushing against her skin, her thoughts swirling. "What am I becoming?" she whispered to herself, the question lingering in the quiet of the night. Alexander's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," he said softly, his footsteps approaching. Emily didn't turn to look at him, but she could feel his presence beside her. He had always been there, guiding her, supporting her, but there was something different in his voice now, a hint of concern, of uncertainty. "I don't know who that is," Emily admitted, her voice tight. "I've always been an Omega. That's all I've ever known. But now I have this power, and I don't know what to do with it." Alexander knelt beside her, his gaze searching hers. "You're not just an Omega anymore, Emily. You've unlocked something within you, something ancient. But that doesn't mean you've lost yourself." She looked at him then, her blue eyes searching his face for some sort of reassurance. "How do I keep control?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How do I stop the wolf from taking over?" Alexander took a deep breath, his eyes softening with understanding. "You need to stop fighting it," he said gently. "The wolf is part of you now. You can't push it away. You have to learn to coexist with it. The power is yours to control, but you have to embrace it, not fear it." Emily absorbed his words, the weight of them sinking into her chest. She had always been afraid of what she might become, afraid that the power would turn her into something she couldn't control. But Alexander was right. She couldn't keep fighting it. The wolf was part of her now. She had to learn to work with it, to harness it. But how? "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what will happen if I lose control." Alexander reached out, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "Fear is natural," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "But you're not alone in this, Emily. You have me, and you have the power to shape your destiny." His words brought her a sense of calm, but the fear still lingered in the pit of her stomach. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She didn't want to become something she couldn't control. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the power inside her was not something to be feared. It was a part of her, a part she had to learn to embrace. "I'll try," she said softly, her voice full of determination. "I'll learn to control it. I'll learn to be who I'm meant to be." Alexander smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "I believe in you, Emily. You're stronger than you think." The next few days passed in a haze of new realizations and growing control. Emily focused on listening to the power within her, on understanding the wolf that lived inside her. She spent hours meditating, practicing focusing the energy, feeling the connection between her body and the wolf's spirit. Slowly, she began to feel more in tune with it, more at peace with its presence. The power that had once terrified her was now a source of strength. She was learning to channel it, to use it when necessary, and to keep it in check when it wasn't. One morning, after several days of focused training, Emily stood at the edge of the garden, her breath steady and calm. She reached out with her mind, feeling the pulse of energy that now flowed through her. For the first time, she felt no fear, no doubt. She could feel the wolf stirring within her, but it wasn't a struggle. It was a partnership. She wasn't losing herself to it. She was becoming something new, something powerful, something complete. "I think I understand now," she whispered. To herself, a smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't just an Omega. She was something more, something stronger. And with Alexander by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next.